Okay, we got a busy schedule this afternoon, and so we are going to start. This is the House Committee on Appropriations Subcommittee on Public Safety. We have already heard from a good portion of our agencies on this prior Friday, and hopefully going to hear from most of the rest of the agencies depending on time today. And what we don't hear from today, we'll hear from this coming Friday. We're on the 2012 budget, and first up is corrections. Sit. Sit. Becky, I don't know if we got another chair, but you probably need to be up there too. We can roll. Becky, you're going to need a chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, our budget does start on page 32 of your tracking document. Do the same way we did the amended. Just highlight several sections, if I may, of our budget, then open up to questions of you and the committee. First item I want to bring up is on page 33.
Our numbers are different, so just deal with line numbers. And
yes, sir. 18.7, section 18.74. 18.74. You'll see it's a small monetary amount, but as we talked about when we discussed the amended budget, we are working closer than ever before with pardons and paroles. We've taken a look at our clemency operations and our offender administration operations, and it turns out we think we can become more efficient if we transfer over four full-time positions to the clemency operations, state pardons, and parole as we modernize our efficiencies, and we believe we might get some a little quicker releases than we have been in the past. So we're asking permission to do that. Next line is 18.9, private prisons. You'll
all right. You don't have the tracking sheets? Okay.
I can get your, want me to get your tracking sheet? Do you have it?
do you have an extra tracking sheet?
I can go get a couple if you want me to.
I think I've got one.
Is that extra one?
And they can share. And Becky's giving me one.
Tracking sheets too.
Yeah, 12.
Thanks.
If y'all need another one, I've got one. Does everybody have tracking sheets? Okay.
And sir, again, we're on 18.7, offender management, 18.7.4 specifically. Annualize a transfer of funds in 4 positions to clemency operations, state board of pardons and paroles to make us more efficient as a team as we work to release inmates on time. Section 18.9, the item under there is to provide funding for 2 new private prison facilities, one for 6 months operating expense and one for 4 months operating expense. As you're aware, we have a partner constructing a 1,500 bed private prison in Milledgeville, Baldwin County, and we believe that will open up and be ready for inmates come January of next year. We have another provider currently coming out of the ground in Millen, Jenkins County for a 1,150 bed prison. We believe that will come about 3 months later. And as we briefed last time, sir, both of these are expandable up to 2,500 total beds should we have the need in the future. Their master plan to do that. On 18.11, state prison program, you'll see 18.11.4 is to annualize the operating funds for 4 fast-track facilities. As you recall, a fast-track facility is a 256-bed housing unit built on the grounds of an existing prison inside the wire, far more efficient to operate. And we'll be opening those up at Augusta State Medical Prison, the Classification Prison down the road in Jackson, Telfair State Prison, and Central State Prison. Again, those are just annualizations of those 4 additions. Continuing in Section 18, 18.11.5, that's to annualize the closure of Metro State Prison. That's the female facility we have here in metropolitan Atlanta. and we will disperse those populations to our other 2 female facilities across the state of Georgia. As we talked previously, we will close 3 200-bed pre-release centers April, May, and June of this fiscal year, and then the recommendation is to close the remaining 3 in January of next fiscal year. And then, as you're aware, back in November, we did shut down Men's State Prison in Milledgeville, and the annualized savings from that closure is reflected in the document. Our total reduction sits at about $20.2 million for fiscal year 12. And then, as I asked in the 11 amended process, again working very closely with partisan paroles, I ask that you leave them as intact as possible, because we've learned that if you hit partisan paroles with some reductions, some furloughs, it ends up backing up in our system. And so, subject to your questions, that's our presentation today.
Are there questions from the committee?
Sir, I might add, while you wait for those questions, if I may, we did go through a complete scrub of the statutes that affect the Department of Corrections. Your question was, are there any things that we're currently doing that perhaps we should not be doing, or other changes that could be recommended? We did do a thorough scrub. We think the statutes pertaining to the Department of Corrections are appropriate. The only changes perhaps that may be considered, I believe, were taken care of with the governor's press conference last week about taking a look at the entire criminal justice system and taking a look at perhaps some sentencing reform.
Okay. Chairman Bearden.
How many questions do I get? How many don't we start off with? 1 or 3? I got a couple.
Go.
Okay. In your contracts, there's a contract for $10,000 for maintenance of a Washington, D.C. office. Can you bring me up to speed on that?
Do you have that one?
That's actually the office that the state of Georgia maintains there, as best I understand it, and that cost is split between several different agencies, and $10,000 has historically been GDC's portion of that contract.
Who's housed up there?
I do not know. We have a contract with OPB.
So Corrections is paying a portion of an office expense in Washington, and we don't know who's there?
No, sir. Our contract does not state who occupies it. The way I understand it, it's maybe our presence in Washington, D.C., and we require office space there, but I do not have a name that goes with that.
Okay.
Could we get some information on that?
Certainly.
Also, in the contracts, there's $60,000 of trained staff in Prime for Life. What is Prime for Life?
Prime for Life is a program that provides to the inmate population to prepare them for release into society, and we just do that off a contract rather than having state employees do that. It's a cognitive thinking process, program rather.
Is there a track record for this to show what kind of results is coming out from this?
Yes, there is. It's actually about 10 years, Chairman Beardenworth, in research. Recollection is that it's about a 17% reduction in recidivism through this program, but I can get you those results specifically.
Okay, and one more. There's showing $224,000 for D. Ray James, showing funding there, but it's been closed for over a year. Why would that be?
I can answer that.
Okay.
Actually, what happened was that some of the inmates did cross into this fiscal year. I believe we had those out by July 16th, the 15th or 16th. So it's actually covering that time span. So those funds will actually transfer to the other private prisons in next fiscal year. So it really just took care of the transfer of the final inmates that last 2 weeks.
Okay, I'm going to take a step back here, back to the Prime for Life. How many people go through this?
I don't have that information off the top of my head. I can prepare that for you, though. Provide that for you.
Okay. That's enough.
We'll give you the whole write-up.
Chairman.
Chairman Willard.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner, I imagine your department has a number of private contracts, whether it be suppliers of food, materials, et cetera, maintenance. Does your department have a policy with regards to the periodic re-bidding RFPs on these type contracts, or what is the policy?
We follow the state procurement policies.
I don't know what it is. Tell me what it is.
It'll vary depending upon what the contract is. I can give you an example, and Becky might correct me, I could be wrong here, but on our private prisons, for example, we allow multiple extensions of 1-year contracts, and I believe is it up to 20 years? Up to 20 years, 1 year, multiple extensions of the contract.
Okay.
So we follow their guidelines. Now, private maintenance.
That's amortized, I guess, the investment too for the
Yes,
private
sir, that's correct.
facilities. Okay.
Big capital
Service
expenditure.
contracts. Tell me about those.
Service contracts, we will audit for efficiency. For example, we have currently 2 privatized maintenance contracts, and we require that we compare apples and apples. So in other words, we'll take a like facility that has a state-operated maintenance program, compare it dollar for dollar, apples to the private programs, and see which one is the best model. Then we make a decision on a yearly basis on those.
By decision on a yearly basis, do you put it out for rebidding? If you open it up for rebidding on an annual basis?
Yes, sir. If we decide, for example, to continue on with the privatized maintenance program, that would be rebid. And again, we've got 2 of those that we're currently operating.
And what about food suppliers contracts?
Food suppliers, the majority of our food are supplied by Food and Farm Services within the Department of
Within your own
Corrections.
department?
Yes, sir. About,
Okay.
I believe over 50% of the food we consume is provided by our own farms.
There's something that appears on your budget with the University of Cincinnati, $160,000. What does that cover?
Becky?
The DRC, that's the DRC evaluation.
DRC.
Day Reporting Center, sir, I'm sorry.
All right. I don't know acronyms.
I'm sorry. Yes, sir, Day
Department
Reporting Center.
Reporting Centers?
Day Reporting
Day
Center.
Reporting Centers. Okay. And what do they do?
Day Report Center Chairman is
No, I mean, what does Cincinnati do?
they did the actual study, as Chairman King alerted to. We don't want to do a program unless we have empirical results that it makes a difference. They came and did a multi-year evaluation of those 13 day report centers to show us that they were having the intended effect.
Is that a continuing contract or a one-time?
I believe it's a one-time, yeah.
It's one time. Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Representative Green.
Thank you, Miss. Is it on?
I got everything around you on.
Okay. Well,
Push, push the button on the back of your mic.
I thought I did.
It's on that, Joe.
It's what?
Push that button. It's on. It's on.
Never had a problem being heard before.
Well, you just may have to change chairs.
Let me just switch for just a moment, Jeremy.
Yeah, you are on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, down in my area, it's Bainbridge, and we have we noticed that $397,000 in the offender management funds last year were lapsed, and $339,000 in transition centers, and also we see that $244,000 in Bainbridge alone. What's going on there?
I'm glad the chairman asked Becky to have a seat. I'm going to pass this microphone over here.
The last 2 years, if you'll remember, OPB has come back in the last month of the fiscal year, and they've actually asked us for an allotment reduction. And so what we have to do is sort of go into a scraping mode and find money anywhere we can and try to save some funding that can be basically given up that last month. Offender management, $370,000 was part of that allotment reduction, and then our regular lapse in there was 27, so that gives you the 397. Transitional centers, 250,000 of that was the allotment reduction. And did you have another one? Bainbridge. Bainbridge was only 30,000, and our regular lapse was 57. I think though, what you may be seeing in there is the total fund lapse was over 200,000, and those are other funds, and those weren't available.
But why is Bainbridge separate there?
Bainbridge was originally set up as a separate program.
And go ahead.
If I may, I can answer that one. At the time we switched to program-based budgeting 7-8 years ago, that was the only probation residential substance abuse treatment center that we had, so it was treated as a separate program.
And we continue to do that even though we could incorporate it?
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you something else. Let me move on to something else there. I'm still not satisfied quite with the answer there. But in probation supervision, you have a contract with Jared Roberts and to guide and to monitor probationers through the Green TIF program. What is the Green TIF program?
The Green TIF program is something that's actually funded with a DOL, Department of Labor grant. So no state funds go to that program, but it was something that we have a 2-year grant for. We're in the first year of that grant period. And basically they're training probationers to do green construction, solar energy, energy efficient management, and they're partnering with Multritech to do that.
So everything comes through the Department of Labor. Y'all are just sort of the
Because
recipient.
they're targeting probationers. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Powell. How about that one?
Just dead down here.
Evidently, that's what happens when you sit to the left.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Becky, I got several questions I want to ask, and it's, you know, and Brian, I'm not going to get on TIF College this year. I mean, it's a done deal,
Yes, sir.
regardless of what I think of the past. But this committee, given the budgetary situation we're into, this committee has taken its job very serious about trying to look through all of these budgets. And, you know, of course, corrections, it probably being the biggest of all the budgets. We've tried to digest and analyze in these committee meetings, but I'm going to work off of the document. This is the OPB, the summary document. It's a breakdown of stuff. I want to start with salaries. 2011, $427,800,000 in salaries. Could you tell me a little bit, is that a factual figure, or is any lapse in that?
Our personal services budget actually, a couple of years ago when we went into the budget reduction mode, before that we had kind of been up and down a little bit, but we are pretty much dead on with our salaries now. In fact, we have to watch our positions filled very closely because we could get to a point. I mean, for an agency our size, we're within less than $1 million every time, and we watch our positions filled every payday. And right now we're in the negative, on the negative side of that number. But yeah, it's really close, almost dead on.
So could you give me a figure of how much the total salaries for DOC are?
I don't have it right off the top of my head. It's right under $600 million with everything, but I can get that for you with everything, fringes and everything. Unemployment, workers' comp.
So when you're computing, you compute the workers' comp and everything into that
We
total.
take the whole personal services costing.
Can you address the temporary or casual labor? It's quoted here at a little over $9 million.
Yeah, and I'll have to look and see if that number's actually correct. You know, when we create the budget, sometimes the numbers from the past are put in there, and while we concentrate on getting the entire number for that object class correct, the temporary labor, the overtime number, and all those may not be dead on. So I need to look at that number for you. But temporary labor includes like our teachers, any hourly positions like that we would have in the field. Chaplains, that sort of thing. So we do have some.
Could you get us some details on that?
Absolutely.
We're trying to do a tracking where the big money is in this. As a follow-up on that question, there hasn't been any pay raises, have there?
No, sir. We've not had as you recall, 2008, I believe it was, we were in line to have pay raises for our starting correctional officers. There's not been a significant increase in starting pay for correctional officers since 2002. And they're still paid just over $24,000 a year to start.
No salary increases?
No, sir.
What about in the admin staff?
Sir,
Been promotions?
Sir, other than merit, when a correctional officer gets promoted from a CO1 to a CO2 to a sergeant to a lieutenant to a captain, then those those, of course, are pay raises that are built in.
Any pay raises in the administrative staff as far as the upper administrative staff, job creation, deputies to the deputies, and those type of things?
No, what we did, Representative Powell, 2 years ago, we had, you may recall, Mr. Arnold Petro retired. We had a Director of Corrections Division, Deputy Director of Corrections Division, and then we had 4 people under them. We actually eliminated those 2 positions and added 1 deputy apiece. So actually we eliminated twice the payroll of what we replaced it with. We moved it closer to the facilities rather than a central office.
As I go down the sheet, it's got, and I'm not sure what this is, but it says other for $18,222,000.
Other's probably going to be your workers' comp, unemployment. Our workers' comp is over $16 million.
No, no, the
Oh, it's
workers'
separate.
comp is a separate. This shows other for $18 million.
Okay, I'll have to look at that. I don't recall right off the top of my head.
The as we're getting into the personal services, supplies and materials, $29 million. Could you address what that is?
Supplies and materials would include basically everything to do with operating for the facilities. Any repairs and maintenance contracts that they have at the facility level. Is utilities separate on there? It is separate, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's basically going to be the cost to run all of our facilities and our probation offices, as well as central office.
The supplies and materials are?
Yes, sir.
Because I notice it has a separate column at a little over $5 million for repairs and maintenance.
Yeah, I'm not recalling the particular document you're looking at, and I'm assuming you're probably looking at budget. Is that right?
Looking at OPB's, their analysis worksheet.
Yeah, that's probably an estimate. What I'd like to do is provide you with I can break down our expenditures to date, so you can actually see how closely that follows budget, or if we've had to make any changes or adjustments to cover deficits in certain areas. Because in our regular operating, I don't recall if it breaks it out on there, we do have things like, okay, the inmate release. Okay. All right, $29 million. Yeah, I mean, the $29 million is going to be all the operating for all the facilities. That's going to be any type supplies that they buy in the facility.
If I might ask, could y'all furnish, maybe get with the committee and analyst, and maybe give them the information on the breakdown? Because I understand that in the budgeting process you go by what you have done in the past. But in the budgeting process, we want to see what your plans are for the future.
Absolutely.
To see how this system works and such.
Right, because it may change during the year, as you know, it changes.
Under the capital outlay fund, for instance, it's about $9.6 million. We'd like to see what.
Yeah, that's going to be all our bond funds. That's actually pretty low.
That's what funds?
That would be our bond funds that we bring in for our major repair, minor construction projects, safety and security projects, any of those.
If you might could spend some time with Kendra and sort of give us a feel about how this works, because quite frankly we've discussed this and that we got concerns. We really don't know what goes on, because corrections is such a large omnibus agency, and it's not just the core mission of housing inmates, but with all the programs, with the contracts, with adult supervision and things like this. We're trying to get a breakdown on some of these numbers. A couple of other questions, if I might, Mr. Chairman. Could you give us a cost? What would be a total cost of adult supervision?
In a facility?
Well, adult supervision, I'm talking about community supervision, probation services. If there was a way of putting a figure without it being convoluted and split into several different line items, what would it cost for the adult community-based supervision known as probation services, if it was the office and the rents and the maintenance, everything just for that ball of wax?
I can't see
adult.
that, Becky. You're going to have to answer that one.
Okay. The last cost per day report that we have that's out right now, it was $1.23 per day per probation or for regular probation supervision.
Could you get, but I guess what I'm asking is, since everything in the budget, we only see the bigger pictures. We don't know what's in what line category. What would it cost? Say probation services was unplugged and moved under parole.
Okay.
What would be that dollar amount? What are we actually spending for that service?
Okay.
Unless I'm mishearing the question, Representative, I think that would be reflected in 18.1, Becky, would it not? Probation supervision, which is $86.7 million. If that's what you're asking.
That's what I'm asking, but as I see all of the other, when your payroll is all under one category, when maintenance is under a category, private contracts, all of these things, I'm looking at the ballpark, the exact figure of what probation services, what part of that, and quite frankly, also the other services, things like things that I don't deem to be, that I personally don't deem to be a core mission, but the things that by law and code have been put under the umbrella of corrections for years. I guess it's just a breakdown of things and all of these other programs. A couple of other just minor questions, if I might. Commissary and telephone funds, you got a dollar amount on what comes in off of that? What's the breakdown? How it's divided, and where's the money going?
Right now, off the top of my head, I know that it's about $3 million that comes up here from the store funds, the commissary funds, to cover the positions that run the commissary. And the last phone projection that we had, we were way down in revenue. We're currently projecting $6.4 million for this year, and it was close to $8 last year, and then even higher the year before that. So revenues are really down in that area.
And I presume that the wardens at facilities are still responsible to forward that money to the central?
The telephone money actually comes into us central, but the store money is the wardens send that to central office.
They do send it to central. And when you talk about the stores, what about the vending operations at each facility? Is that?
We do actually do not have a total number for that. That's actually held at the facility. And I'm sure you'll remember the legislation that was passed a few years ago, the Employee Benefit Fund. So those funds are actually held locally. We don't actually get into the spending of those funds.
And is there an audit done on these?
Yes, sir. There is an audit.
On a per institution basis?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Georgia Correctional Industries, could you give us just an update on the status? And I asked that question that, as y'all know, that there's been some discussion. Department of Revenue is wanting to do tags, start doing their own tags, go to the new type of tag instead of the old printed, the old stamp, and basically get it away from Correctional Industries. But could you give us a little oversight about how Correctional Industries, are they still turning a profit? If the tag business goes away and they start privatizing that through the Department of Revenue, what will be the effect?
Well, it will definitely have a negative impact on their sales and their revenue. It is something that they've typically had a small profit margin on for many, many years now. We are talking to Department of Revenue and trying to engage them in conversation because GCI is very interested in continuing to do that business if at all possible. We haven't heard anything as of lately, but we are trying to set up a meeting now with their commissioner to discuss the possibilities of it. I know that I think the bid that went out on the street, GCI was not qualified for that based on some of the questions. So we're working to see if we can partner with a vendor or do something else to try to keep some of that business. We are interested in keeping it.
Other parts of GCI right now, I mean, are they general operation of their business, not the farm and food, since that sort of goes back in-house, but or maybe it is a good question to ask. How does that profitability, does it show a profit to that side of the ledger book?
No, sir. That basically, GCI, the food and farm piece, nets out. Anything that they bring in revenue helps to cover the food and farm cost for the inmates, so it helps control our cost, GUC's cost to feed the inmates. That's in the contract that all the revenue goes back into that. There's not a lot of revenue that comes in, but all of it's designated to go back to food and farm. Currently, GCI sales last year were $23.6 million. The year before that, 24.2, and the year before that, 27.8. So you can see that they've slightly decreased each year. Where kind of looks like we're on the same path right now to maybe finish out with 24 million this year. So hopefully we'll have the same type of year we had last year and maybe stop the decline. But typically, I mean, the last few years they have seen a decline in their sales.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to recognize Representative Baker next, but before I do, I've got a question. In your budget, you've got $628,000 in private security for the TIFT campus. Basically, I have two questions. Number one, why do we need security? And number two, why are we obtaining private security?
First question is open campus. That's 42 acres and right in the middle of a small town, so we need to control after hours access to that campus. We don't have a fence around the whole thing. Secondly, if you privatize it, in my opinion, it keeps it a lot cleaner than having hire off-duty correctional officers who already work for the Department of Corrections. So that was just a policy decision we made early on.
The cost that you are paying for private security is less than what it would take to utilize department personnel? I'm not talking about off-duty and paying them by the hour. I'm just talking about department personnel.
I'm not sure I understand the question, Chairman.
Well, I mean,
Rephrase,
security is sort of what you do at the prison
Yes,
system,
sir.
isn't it?
Yes, sir.
And so why is it that we find the necessity for hiring private security firms when we've got people who are trained for security and for people management already on the payroll?
That's an option that I guess we could go to, but again, I don't know that you're actually certified as a correctional officer to supervise an open campus. Or a probation officer probably be more likely, I guess, thinking through your question, because they're used to working in the community. That's something we can certainly take a look at. And let me take a look at the different legal options we have there too, because of a decision we made several years ago to do that. But I can certainly take a look at that and provide the information to you what the different options would be.
So we are only providing security between 5 p.m. and 6 a.m.?
No, it's 24/7, 365 security on that campus.
Okay. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. East, I guess I would direct this to you. MHM Correctional Services. Could you tell me what they provide for us?
MHM currently provides all the mental health and dental health services, staffing resources.
I'm sorry, dental?
And dental, yes, sir.
How long have they had the contract?
They've had the contract for 10 years, as I understand it. They won the bid last.
Is that bid out every year?
No, sir. Basically, when a contract is bid out for services initially, there's usually a time, and it's dependent upon the type of services you're asking for, the amount of money, the capital investment, that type of thing is taken into consideration. And so many year renewable options are actually allotted at the first of that contract. Now, you can renegotiate. We always follow DOES policy when we do that. Legal's always involved, but usually that's specified up front, the number of renewable options.
I didn't see where that was broken out. So as far as the mental health portion of it, the total, what I saw, the total cost of the mental health portion of it was like $25 million.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
So what about I don't see the dental, and
the dental health is about another $2.5 million.
Are they a local? Are they local, by the way? Are they a Georgia firm? I'd like to know that.
I believe they are, but I can find out and confirm that for you.
Okay, all right. And but you can break. Okay, so you said there's about $2 million. So basically, their contract's like for $27 million plus for the year.
Yes, sir.
And I would like to know, so they've been with us 10 years. Are we bidding that every year? Or, I'm sorry, what did you say about that?
No, sir, we're not bidding that every year. I'll have to look at the contract, but usually up front, we specify so many renewable year options, so it may have had 10 or 15. Usually big contracts like that, we like to have continuity in the care, so we will have gone for more number of years of service than we would have like maybe a private maintenance contract. Maybe that's typically 3 to 5 years. On a health care type contract, we probably would have gone for more, but I can look at that.
And when we do that, then I'm assuming that y'all go back and take a look at what the services they're offering us from year to year to year, and make sure that we're getting those services.
Absolutely.
That they're there.
And our contractors were, most of them, especially MHM, GCHC, and our private partners, were heavily involved in the budget reductions with us. So not only did we look, internally at GDC, but we also partnered with our contractors to see, what can we do to cut, to cut back the cost on our contracts as well. So yes, sir, they've been a very good partner with us.
And I would be interested in knowing if they're a Georgia-based firm, because I hope that that we find that to be the case. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Bearden.
Becky, last year I believe this committee asked for the vending dollars of each facility. I don't recall receiving that, so if we can make sure we get that, I would greatly appreciate it. Going back to private contracts real quick, you have many descriptions for provide substance abuse and counseling, which we know is important. And under your sole source and vendors, about the highest price one's around $30,000 a year, but there's 14 with the designation of TBD, which I'm sure is to be determined or for a later date. The lowest number on that end is 23,000, but there's many for 49, 54, 80, 90,000, well over $500,000 of funds for it.
Those are in the probation supervision program, I believe. I believe those, the ones you're talking about, are in the in probation. They're in our day reporting centers, and they're basically hourly paid. So depending upon the number of hours they're going to work in a year will depend upon. That's why the salary is going to vary so much. It's dependent upon how many hours they work, and some of the TBDs budget net may need to be updated because just typically that information changes.
So there could be a variation of $60,000 difference between one vendor at one location and another vendor at another location?
It could be the timing in which they started during that year. It could be a number of things, but we could verify it, but yes, sir, there could be a variance.
Two other, one's really a question, two questions. The maintenance contract at TIFT, is this things that the inmates could not do?
Yes, sir, because everything that an inmate can do on the campus, they do.
As y'all remember, we had a little bill last year that would have put pro supervision under corrections. Representative Powell, I believe, for several years came up with something. I just want to see if y'all would be supportive of that. Move the probation portion, basically the supervision from probation and parole, into a new agency altogether. Would y'all be supportive of something like that?
Let me take Becky off the hook on that one. We will do whatever the General Assembly says. I think you know that. Whatever the governor wants and the General Assembly passes.
But we just like to have the support of the agencies when we start looking at something. But
I think you get a little bit of duplication if you went that way. Again, I would not be opposed to it. It's the pleasure of the General Assembly and the governor if we did something like that. But there might be an awful lot of duplication of services when you do that. Certainly worth exploring.
Appreciate it.
Following up a little bit on Chairman Bearden's question about the separate counseling contracts, are any of these people who are contract recipients, are they former employees of corrections, people who may have retired or left the agency and then hired back under contract?
I can think of one off the top of my head, yes. One that I can think of. There may be more, but I can think of one currently. Okay. Are there more that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, and I don't know that that's going to be the norm in that field. I really don't. But we can verify.
What about in security contracts?
The security contracts?
former employees who have been hired back or offered contracts on security, like maybe on TIF campus or
No, sir.
otherwise?
No, sir, they're not.
Okay. Chairman Willard.
I want to follow up, if I might, Commissioner. I saw the figures, and one thing that jumped out at me was the telecommunications amount of roughly almost $22 million annually. Does that cover the inmates making phone calls? What does that cover?
No, sir, that's our GETS, our gate amount that we pay.
Tell me
And
what that means. I don't have,
the,
gate doesn't tell me anything.
Georgia Enterprise Technology Services with GTA,
Georgia Enterprise Technology Services.
the gate program, the,
Okay.
we're,
From the state?
we're a gate agency, yes, sir.
You're
with
paying this to
GTA.
the state then?
So that money goes to GTA to pay for that contract.
Okay. And follow up with what was requested about the phones being used by inmates. They're calling out collect. What is the amount charged on those collect calls?
That amount is regulated by the PSC, and I know that they just had their latest and last decrease in the rate. And I don't remember right off the top of my head. I think it's $2 and something to initiate the charge. And I don't know how much per minute, but I know that it did go down last July. We can get that rate.
Does an amount come into the Department of Corrections?
Oh yes, sir. I'm sorry. That's the 6.4 million projection that we have for this year.
When you receive that money, does it go back into the general fund, or is it used within the department?
No, sir. It's used within the department for inmate benefit. It can go to health care. Typically, is where it goes. Is where the department uses it. But it can be used for counseling or.
How's that reflected in your budget?
It's in there under other funds.
Other funds received?
Yes, sir. And actually, it's probably over budget right now. It's budgeted at about $8 million, and
Right.
we'll only receive 6.4.
And did I understand the vending machines that are at the facilities, the funds that are received there are retained by the local facility?
Yes, sir.
And what controls the use of those funds?
Statute controls the use of those funds, and there's a committee set up at each facility. But again, statute regulates exactly how they spend that money,
All right.
and those
Thank
funds are audited.
Thank you.
Chairman, Representative Powell, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a follow-up behind Mr. Bearden, since my name was invoked, Commissioner, question you specifically, in your answer to Chairman Bearden, was that you felt like if there was a combined effort of the parole and probation community-based services, something that I've been pushing for too many years about this. But you said you thought there'd be a duplication. Could you explain your thoughts about
Perhaps.
what type of duplication?
Perhaps, and I haven't given it much thought, obviously, in preparation for a detailed discussion today, but right now the handoff looks like this. You have 21,000 inmates who are getting out of the prison system every year, and they go to pardons and parole, and then many of them come back to probation. It would seem to me that we might just have some duplication if you divided that even further to probation and parole. However, I think there'd be more efficiency if all community corrections offenders were under one agency. It's just that handoff between the two that I think would make it difficult. Then the other thing I think you might have to do, of course, you could do it out of efficiencies gained out of the prison system, and that you'd have to increase personnel services for the new agency. You'd have to increase budget services and those kind of things, fleet training. But again, certainly I think it's worth exploring.
Flip a coin. Maybe it is, maybe it's not.
Yes, sir.
But it would probably certainly solve some of the duplications, though, that we've had in the past. Duplication of office spaces in judicial circuits. Duplication as far as, and the problems that we have long since known where judges, where we have a lot of inmates that come out that they may have to report for probation and parole at the same time.
I think there's
which
pluses.
Doesn't make an awful lot of sense.
I think there's pluses and minuses on both sides of that, Representative Powell.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Let me use Representative Powell's mic. Okay. Commissioner, we are closing Metro.
Yes, sir.
All right. There's a maintenance contract with that particular, that will no longer.
That's correct.
How many other maintenance contracts do we have that are with private?
One.
Can you tell us something? Is that a cost savings to the state?
We took that on either 2 or 3 years ago to find out, because that question perennially came up. If you're going to maintain an expensive infrastructure like a state prison, in 2010, 2011, is it better to have a private sector do that for you or use your existing staff to do that? So we picked 2 prisons in metropolitan Atlanta, one prison in metropolitan Atlanta, and then the classification prison down in Jackson. Again, compare apples to apples, and I don't think that contract will be continued. I know specifically at Metro, since we're closing it, and I doubt that we're going to continue that contract at Jackson as well.
Okay. Since Metro is closing, did we have any stimulus funds in the Metro prison?
Don't think so, do we?
Our stimulus funds were actually spent over the course of about 3 months. We had an accelerated spend on that this year, so they were actually spread across all facilities. But something that you might need to know is that when we calculated how much it cost to run Metro, that amount was reduced in state funds. So that reduction was taken in whole in state funds. Yes,
okay.
Sir. Even though we had our funds in there in this current year.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For either one of you, are our uniform cost, training cost, and cost associated with our correctional officers pretty much consistent as for the last 2-3 years? And the reason I'm asking is that we're down approximately 2,200 correctional officer positions, and yet I don't see those costs being reduced. And I guess my question is why? It looks like that on a per capita basis that we would have seen a reduction in training cost and in uniform and equipment cost.
I've not looked at that specifically, Becky. I don't know if you've taken a look at that either.
No, we had an initial reduction that first year. It was captured in our austerity reduction. The initial year we had a reduction because we basically froze the hiring, cross-leveled staff, and did some other things. So we didn't have to have many BCOT, basic correctional officer training classes that first year. We dropped significantly, but that was captured in a one-time cost. Now we're very consistent in the number of officers that we train every year. Basically, the uniforms we don't spend a lot of new money every year on uniforms because we have an inventory and we recycle everything. So you're really after that first initial cost savings where we did not have as many classes that first year. After that, our costs have been pretty consistent.
Correctional industries. Do you periodically compare, because you buy a lot of your supplies from correctional industries, and ultimately the idea is to not only use inmate labor for those kinds of services, but also to generate some kind of profit or generate a lower cost. Do you, on a regular basis, the items that are sold through correctional industries, do you compare those with the private sector to make sure that what you are paying for chemicals, cleaning supplies, et cetera, are comparable to what you could buy from the private sector?
We do more specifically in the field, because they really are the higher volume users of most of the GCI products. They're all the time getting courted by other salesmen to try their products and all. We typically will review them that way. There's no real routine way that we do it, or we don't specify the facility does it once every quarter. But it is done in the field, and if we ever find that GCI has a price that's higher than a comparable product, then they'll either meet or beat that price. We will not pay more just to go with GCI.
Okay. Next question, dealing with parole supervision. Is there or probation supervision, is there a standard or a recommendation where you require a probation officer to actually go into the offender's home or place of business on a regular basis?
Yes, sir, there are, and that depends upon the risk classification of the probationer. Depending upon when we score him out on a risk classification, if he scores at the high end of the scale, we're required to go into the field, into the residence, into the home to do the checks. Now, over time, just like prison inmates, hopefully the offenders get the message and start to behave. So just like prisoners can start out at a high security prison, they can work their way down to a minimum or medium security prison. Probationers are the same way. They can work their way down to lower supervision levels. And I think, again, off the top of my head, we are actively supervising in the field, at the homes, at the residence, based upon a risk assessment, about 60,000 of those felony probationers.
And the reason I ask that, and this is purely anecdotal, but I have heard from some sheriffs that a large part of some of the offenders that they have are people who are on probation or on parole, and that they periodically will go into a house to make an arrest, and they will find various and sundry items that obviously didn't appear overnight and had been there some time, and yet if there were periodic visits to the offender's residence, that certainly the probation or parole officers would have been aware that that kind of activity was going on.
Yes, sir.
Representative Green, or no, Baker, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if you could, if you have these figures, if not, if you could provide us with, could you give us a breakdown 212 budget on engineering and construction costs, the dollar amount, and if it's itemized, I'd like to see an itemized breakdown.
Absolutely. Yes, that's in people's soft. We can get that for you.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? And I think that may be the end. And I would ask that you get with Kendra and the additional information that the committee has requested, that get it to us fairly soon.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you very much.
Thank you.
Paroles.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This is going to be under Section 34 of the tracking document.
All right, everybody understand this. 34 under the tracking document. If you will, if you would just hit the high points of the governor's recommendation, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Very well, sir. There are not many changes that we discussed back in the 11 amended. Most of them are global changes. I do want to bring to your attention under Section 34.3 under parole supervision. If you recall, under the amended, we had consolidated the Gainesville parole office and actually moved it into state space. That cost under this section has been annualized. We are also combining offices into state office in Rome, Augusta, Louisville, and Dublin. Those are the others that were not reflected in the amended but will be in the 12 budget. Other than that, there are not really any changes that you have not already heard about. I'll be more than happy to entertain any specific questions you may have.
Chairman Willard.
Thank you. Tell me, if you would, the changes where you made offices, are these putting parole and probations together?
They are, yes, sir. Back several years ago when the Department of Corrections closed their diversion centers, they occupied those diversion centers with probation offices, spaces that they were leasing, and they have also opened up day reporting centers within those spaces. Parole is involved in the day reporting centers, but also where it was feasible to do so, we are getting out of our lease space and moving in to those offices as well.
Okay, so there's more to come in the future of the combination that we're talking about?
Actually, these right here are the ones where there's remaining state property that we can do it and we can get out of our leases. However, we are actively looking at where we may be able to consolidate, where perhaps probation may have a lease and parole has a lease. can we get shared space and really leverage that to get a better price per square footage.
Well, that goes, I guess, what I was trying to get to ask the question very well. Do you have other examples in the state in the future where you see there will be combining of the two offices, really the functions, although I recognize there's different levels of function.
Right.
The primary function is overseeing people out of prisons. Is that a combining of services you're able to do in more places than where you have?
I think we'll be able to do that, but I'm not so sure we're going to be seeing a big savings because I'm not aware of any other state-owned spaces where that would be feasible.
Do the other probation officers lease space that you're talking about?
Yes, sir. In majority of parole and probation space is leased.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you speak to the furloughs and what the effect would be, or the impact on your agency, as well as the victim services, the furloughs that take place there, and what would be the impact on that? Could you take less furloughs? Is that possible?
Right now we are not budgeted for furloughs, and I'll tell you, regardless of the program, whether it be victim services or parole supervision or clemency, we have projected that to go with one furlough day, it will cost approximately 50 releases to the Department of Corrections. And in essence, if you look at a year basis of furloughs, you'll actually cost the Department of Corrections more than what you would actually save in furloughs on parole side.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Representative Bearden. Chairman Bearden, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You brought up the Victim Services Program. What's the history of that program, and how many people work in that program, and basically how many victims are served each year?
Yes, sir. I will, Mr. Chair. And actually, knowing that you may have some questions regarding that, we've got copies we'd be more than happy to furnish to you now, or certainly when this concludes. But just as a highlight, that is a shared service. That unit represents parole as well as the Department of Corrections. There are 5 statutory requirements that associate with that victim services. So it's not just about parolees, it's also about inmates and providing services to those victims. When you look at the combined agencies of about 230,000 offenders, we only have 6 staff that are associated with providing those services. And just real briefly, I'll share with you, part of their statutory requirement is that the Office of Victim Services, they give 20 days advance notice to victims on record with the board. They notify victims within 72 hours of a final decision to parole. They provide notification to registered crime victims of offenders' custodial status, whether it's a release from prison, whether it's a furlough, whether it's a transfer to a work release. They distribute the victim impact statement, which is very important at the local level, that is through the district attorney's office. And finally, they have notification responsibilities and purposes of victims, and they provide copies to prosecuting attorneys to include victims' name, address, and telephone numbers. And those are the statutory requirements, not to mention that they serve as advocates for victims. They provide orientation with the ultimate goal of making sure that victims aren't victimized twice, once by the offender and twice by the system. That's the whole goal of the victims' services. During FY10, 2,400 victims received restitution from parolees. A lot of that, majority of that is determined by this unit. There were 1,018 crime victims seen since the formation of this unit back in 2006 through 12 Victim Visitors Day, where they have an opportunity to come in actually speak to the parole board, get a better understanding of the correctional system, know what to expect as a victim, and then, of course, our notification prior to the release of a victim. Again, it's a shared service. It's 6 individuals doing those 5 statutory requirements as well as other responsibilities, not just for parole but also for the Department of Corrections.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Following up on that question a little bit, besides the victim, who all do you notify of a either pending parole consideration or pending release?
If those that desire to be notified, many times it can be victims, but it is also oftentimes prosecutors as well as judges that require to be notified.
Sheriffs?
That's correct, if they require it.
Let me ask you another question. Are these sent out by certified mail or regular mail? How are they notified?
I believe they are sent out through regular mail.
And my question is that I understand that victims, that might be the best way to notify them. But I don't know of a sheriff, a judge, a prosecutor who does not have email.
Correct.
And I have seen stacks of mail that my judges and my prosecutors have given me showing that we're wasting paper, we're wasting employee staff time, and we're wasting postage when it would be much simpler to blast email those out to the prosecutors, the sheriffs, and the judges, and it's a waste of staff time and it's a waste of money.
I agree with you, Mr. Chair, and that's one of the things that we are looking at. We had actually got one committee together that just looked at ways we can eliminate and reduce postage, and this was one of those requirements. Naturally, if there's a victim that doesn't have email, we're going to notify them in the best way, but one of the things we are actually looking at within this unit is asking those that register what would be their preferred notification, and that is one of the very issues that has come to the attention. That's one of the things we're addressing out of that unit.
Okay. I mean, we sort of discussed this last year. How long does it take to make this decision?
Yes, sir. I can, since coming in this position in July, that is one thing that we did discuss with Director of Victim Services is carryover matters from last year, and that's one of the things we're working on. I'll assure you it'll get top priority.
How long?
I can go back and start implementing today.
That's soon enough.
Yes, sir.
Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael?
Yes, sir.
And up front, I want to congratulate you on your new job over there. You may be one of the very few people I know that can move in between the two principal agencies that have a long-standing knowledge of problems in our criminal justice system and how they affect each other. So I'm not going to try to ask you many questions from your former role at corrections.
Thank you, sir.
Hopefully we might get some of those answers at another time. Could you tell me how many parole officers do we currently have?
You have just at about 450 parole officers.
Can you tell me what is the caseload, average caseload?
Average statewide caseload is 80.
80. From your former position, do you know, and I meant to ask the Commissioner of Corrections, how many probation officers are there?
How many probation officers?
Would you have any idea of that?
Sir, I would ballpark it at between 800 and 900.
Roughly double the amount that we have at parole.
Yes, sir.
Could you tell us a little bit, and this might be for Beth as the budget person, but one of the things this committee has been looking at is all the private contracts, things from paying universities, paying everybody under the shining sun to advise, as opposed to using in-house staff. Could you tell us a little bit about any private contracts or the roster of private contracts y'all may have?
I can provide those to you. Most of them are maintenance contracts for example, our copier machines. Our large contract is for substance abuse counseling services, and then our next to largest contract is for our GPS electronic monitoring.
Could you get us that information? Michael, if you might, and I notice we don't have any of the board members here today, been a long standing discussion among some of us that goes back for years about the, for those that's been around, we understand that parole is really the gatekeeper as part of the functions of pardon paroles. Is not just to let inmates out once their time is served or if they had been deemed to be rehabilitated, but in fact the duties over at the board has really become more of a gatekeeper to regulate the flow of inmates, what we can afford to keep in and what we can't. And under that, the board is long standing for many years now. They've had a policy, whether it was 35%, 90%, things like this. Could you share with us your wisdom as to whether there might be a better way that they could do this type of service? And I'm saying this in lieu of it. Thank goodness that the governor has addressed this issue, that Speaker Ralston has addressed this issue, that we're not just locking up people that we're afraid of,
Right.
but, quote, them that we just want to push the button on.
Yes, sir. And Representative Powell, if I may, and then I'll get right to your question. When I referenced about 450 parole officers, that's sworn staff. There are actually only about 300 actual parole officers that are carrying caseloads day in and day out. However, we do utilize senior or assistant chiefs and chiefs in that duty as well. But I just wanted to make that clarification for you. But nevertheless, the caseloads are still about 80. As to your question for parole decision making, while I would never speak for the board in their capacity, I will share with you that there's been remarkable strides in the system that has been made. They now operate off of a guideline system that is actuarial assessment that takes a host of issues into consideration before even looking at them and considering them for parole. Right now, over 95% of sex offenders sex offenders are spending 95% of their time. That's an increase. We have violent offenders that are also increased in their time service, and that's right at about 85%. And all others, on average, serve about 70% of their sentence. But it's gone away from the grid system that was used in the past, and now it's more actuarial, where they take like their crime severity level when they actually look at their crime, but they also factor in their risk assessment. So I think in that regard, from my professional viewpoint, there's been some tremendous strides that have been made in that system, no doubt.
So are you saying that, something that I've been critical over the years is, and, we legislators have done this over the last 20 years with the getting harsh on crime and things like that, that there wasn't a lot of specifics that was put into it. And I'll use, for example, sex offenders. Sex offenders, it's strange to find out that are all categorized as under one umbrella, no matter what it was, whether it was the situation of Romeo and Juliet, or even as much as a town drunk a few years ago down in Richmond County had stopped a lady he was under the influence, stopped a lady in a rain to drive him to a convenience store to get gas for his car. He was charged with kidnapping. Kidnapping is also considered a sex offense, even though it hadn't got anything to do with a sexual offense. But that kept this guy in for 90% of the sentence.
Right. The board has been and is continuing to move in the direction of assessing risk when they make parole decisions. I'll tell you, for instance, on sex offenders, you're exactly right. One-size approach doesn't work with sex offenders. In fact, about 2 weeks ago, the board received training at a workshop, and part of that dealt with the specific utilization of a sex offender instrument that would classify their risk based on their offense and where they are right now. So they're moving more towards those, along with the things such as the COMPASS assessment that determines risk and needs of the offenders, the TCUDS, which is a substance abuse severity index screening instrument. Understanding that clearly one size does not fit all, not just with the type of a crime nor with the offender.
Let me shift gears and I'm going to finish. The Commissioner of Corrections had said that he was concerned with the idea of combining probation and parole adult supervision, basically the community-based supervision, that it might be a duplication. Would you address that from your experience of how that could possibly be a duplication if these services were basically combined under one umbrella, one agency?
Yes, sir. And I appreciate the opportunity to answer that. I think the commissioner was correct in his assessment, but I would go a step further and say that regardless of which agency it fell under, you're always going to be subject to some amount of duplication. I think going in and actually looking at what that duplication may be is where you'll see whether, number one, it saves money, but more importantly, does it work to protect the public and reduce recidivism? That should always be the driver. I think that's what's got to be looked at in any system. I think right now there's a lot of good work being done with the interoperability efforts that, quite frankly, there's been some areas that it sounded good to combine, but when we got looking at it, it really was not in the best interest to combine in a particular area. For instance, it didn't increase quality, it didn't improve efficiencies, nor did it save money. And those are the three critical areas you've got to look at when you're looking at interoperability efforts to avoid those duplications. Was that a good halfway answer, sir?
Well, and I'm at odds about, and I'm at odds, and I'm not sure whether what I've heard from both you and the commissioner was because of a turf mentality and all. But, you know, if we all agree that parole is community of adult supervision after they've been released, probation is the alternative of a judge. And probation, same type services, different type scenarios. But if these were combined, legislation proposed to combine them under an umbrella, I'm still trying to gather how that duplication by combining, when you've got 450 in parole, you've got 800 to 900 in corrections, that if they were there together basically doing the same type monitoring, whether it's a parolee or a probationer, that these officers, by increasing those ranks, that they could be interoperable, or basically a solid unit that would then be doing adult supervision.
Yes, sir. I would, from a practitioner standpoint, I would say that the combining, regardless of where it fell, would actually serve to assist with removing some roadblocks that otherwise can't be removed. We have recognized in the interoperability efforts there are some things that statutorily would probably need to be changed to make it work in a manner that it needs to in the best interest of public safety and reducing recidivism. Again, you'll have duplication, but I think over time those can be worked through. But there are roadblocks that could be moved. And, Representative Powell, I'm not so sure. Turf wars, I've seen over the past 7 or 8 months there's been a greater spirit of cooperation. And I think that at the end of the day, these folks working on these interoperability groups, they want to do what's in the best interest of Georgia. Quite frankly, it wouldn't matter to me as long as whatever the system was, if we could show that it did those things, if it improved quality, if it increased efficiencies, and it reduced savings, that's what I would be interested in. And at the end of the day, one thing that matters is seamless transition for that offender, because research shows consistently that the least disruption throughout the system, the better it is for the offender and the more productive they will be upon release. So I think that would be the ultimate measuring stick for me.
And also, would you agree that the more seamless administration of an adult supervision would also probably be to the betterment of this type of monitoring?
I think clearly if there's two agencies, and I think you gave the example of one being on probation and one being on parole. At the end of the day, pick one.
Exactly right. Thank you, Michael.
Couple of questions. You heard the question I asked the Department of Corrections regarding if they had a standard by which they expected their officers to make in-home and in-workplace visits. Does the board have the same kind of standards?
We do, sir. We have 2 classification levels, which right now we're actually entertaining adding a 3rd classification level. But the high level, they do in fact require that field visits be made, that they do go into the home, that they do look. Board conditions do have Fourth Amendment waivers where they're subject to search of their persons or property. You know, there are times that we would love to go out there when the sheriffs do and look at the home, but when you're talking about the caseloads, and this is certainly not making any excuse, because one thing we realize, while office visits are important, really what's most important is when you're seeing that offender out, where they're living and where they're working. That's the important thing. I wish we could be there and have eyes on them 24/7, but we can't.
So how often do you make home visits?
Minimum of 1 time a month, and a lot of it is driven by the risk. You may have one offender that is doing absolutely great, negative drug screens, no indications of substance abuse, stable employment, so you may not need to go out there that month. And you may have one that can't keep a job, they have positive drug screens, and you may end up going out 5, 6, 7, 8 times that month to see that one offender.
But all of that is documented, so the man on the street can be monitored to find out if they are in fact visiting like they should.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Every interaction and visit is documented according to policy.
All right, my second question, sort of changing gears. Every agency during the governor's formulation of his budget is requested to submit possible cuts at 6, 8, and 10% of their budget, which the governor then considers along with some other information. In the course of those discussions with paroles, there was a proposed, at the 8% level, $901,000 cut for elimination of substance abuse program. Tell me, number one, what that program is, and number two, why it was proposed for a possible cut.
I'll tell you, Mr. Chair, with $50 million budget, you get down to a point where you start looking, and I addressed the furlough issue, that in fact you're going to end up costing more when you furlough. But then there are actually only 2 other what I would call big ticket items. The others we did recommended elimination of, but substance abuse runs right at $1 million, so naturally you want to look at that one. I would not recommend that. I understand that when you're looking at some of the items, that's one of the biggest ones. Right now we deliver substance abuse in 58 of our parole sites. The average treatment cost to parolees is about $122 that undergo substance abuse, and we currently provide substance abuse treatment to 650 parolees. One of the important things of that is that it shows time and time again, research says that is one of the big 4 that has to be addressed to increase the likelihood of an offender succeeding under supervision. And that speaks directly to the core mission. I would also suggest to you that with the strategic intervention program that's being run at Coastal State Prison, that this substance abuse money is actually utilized to provide aftercare services to those that go out onto parole supervision. So it is a critical component of substance abuse, or I'm sorry, of offender productivity and reduction in recidivism. But quite honestly, at the end of the day, when you don't have a lot to choose from, that was a big ticket item.
Thank you. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering, the corrections has a program, Prime Life?
Prime for Life, yes.
Prime for Life. Now, do you have something similar that you go through someone that's being paroled or released?
We do, yes, sir. We have the program that's called Moral Recognition Therapy, and that is a cognitive behavior program. It is one that is also utilized in the prison system. It's also utilized by parole, also by probation. It is one that is proven time and time again to be successful. The good thing about that program is when they leave the prison system, wherever they are in that program, when they come to parole, they go right into it at that level. And that's the beauty of that program. It's proven through validated research. They talked about, I believe the commissioner mentioned University of Cincinnati, but it has been proven successful. And cognitive behavior, one of those 4 areas that we talked about, that if you address those, you're going to reduce their likelihood of reoffending.
So you'd say what y'all do, and then Prime Life run, because I'm having a problem distinguishing between the two. We're not duplicating a service here, are we?
No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir.
All right, thank you.
Representative Green.
All right, Alan, give me some room.
Michael, talk to us briefly about the GPS monitoring contract, and has that been procured?
No, sir. I'll share with you a little bit about GPS, and again, I believe that was one that we put up in the cuts with the governor's recommendation. Again, looking at the numbers, that was second in line behind substance abuse when you talk about 300,000. Right now, we have nearly just over 1,000 that are under some form of electronic monitoring. We have 862 that are on radio frequency monitoring. We have 201 that are on GPS supervision right now. The majority of those, matter of fact, are sex offenders. GPS costing $425 a day, RF costing $295. The current contract we are under is up come June 30th.
But isn't the GPS the most efficient one?
If you were choosing between RF and GPS, I would choose GPS as the best of the two. However, there's a price that comes with it, not just the price of the equipment associated with it, but also the monitoring that's associated with it, and often what they give in the professional arena, they call it a workforce multiplier, that if you talk about 100 being on an average caseload, when you get GPS, the active to do it proactively, it reduces it down to about 1 officer for 25 cases.
One?
Yes, sir. Again, when you know where somebody's going 24/7, you're going to get a lot more indications that you need to respond to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think the shared microphone wants turn.
Please.
Okay.
Just a question for the knowledge of myself and the committee, Michael. Since I've never been in law enforcement, much less know a whole lot about drug tests, other than they used to require legislators to be tested. Given and I go back to the great amount of pleasure I've had in the comments from the governor and Speaker Austin about revamping this system. I also know that in our prison system, in our criminal justice system, that drug abuse is such a heavy part of that, and a lot of those people incarcerated and on probation services. And knowing of what I think the direction that they're wanting to go as far as let's streamline our system of the criminal justice system and make it more affordable. Can you tell, what does it, and I know the reason I'm asking because of the probation officers, I know they do a lot of drug testing of their clientele when they're coming through there. What does a drug test cost?
Usually on a test stick, which now you can test for instance, THC separately, cocaine, amphetamines, but each one of those tests runs about $1.50, and you get an instant result right there on the spot. The only time you ever send out to a lab is if it's to be validated or verified. but about $1.50 a test.
Does that show all the drugs or just the?
No, sir. Each individual one. When you get into a 4 or 5 panel screening where one specimen will show 4 or 5 drugs, usually you're getting up to about the $9 to $12 price range for each test, even though it covers 4 or 5. So economy of scale. A lot of people argue if you've got somebody that just has a history of marijuana usage, you may not want to test them for morphine or barbiturate use. So the test sticks actually let you test for what the offender's known abuse is for.
So you're saying that a test like that an officer would give we'd be talking about like a 5-panel test would be $12, $15 or something to that tune.
Last I've checked, they're about $9 to $12 a test.
And do you find that that's a pretty good indicator to try to keep these folks on the straight and narrow if they know that if they're going to be periodically tested?
I think it is, without a doubt. It's just a tool that you utilize to ensure that they are staying sober and drug-free. I think the day reporting centers have shown phenomenal success, and I believe a lot of that is because of the frequency in which they test. They know that every 2 days they're going to get a test, and that if they use the day before that, it's going to show up. So I think that does keep them on the straight and narrow, especially at day reporting centers.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much. We're going to take what we anticipate will be some relatively short agencies and call on the Attorney General to come speak to us about the Department of Law.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, talk to us.
It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Similar to my comments with Ann Bentley on the FY11, let me reiterate that 88% of our budget's personnel, and we have no discretionary programs. If you look at Section 32, the tracking sheet, the one increase that you'll notice, the fraud unit, that's simply the executive order being signed by Governor Perdue, bringing the Medicaid fraud unit totally under the auspices of the Attorney General's. If you look at the 32.1.5, replacing state funds with a projected increase in other funds as referenced in the 11, that number's a false assumption. We're looking at an 8% increase rather than a 28% increase. The only way that 549 number could occur would be increasing our hourly fee or hiring more lawyers. If we increase our hourly fee, that once again has an adverse effect on the agencies. With regard to the next line, number 6, that number's 0 in our current budget. So where it shows a $34,000 decrease, it's already 0. With regard to number 7, that in essence would be a reduction of 9 lawyers, 7 this year, 2 from the 11. I gave you at the beginning the chart that showed what happened in 2008 when the legislature gave us 20 additional attorneys. At that point, there was a net savings to the state of $3.9 million. Anytime there's a reduction in the number of attorneys, that's going to be an increase in the SAG cost, which exceeds the cost of those in-house attorneys. The only other way to get to a balanced budget would be 18 furlough days. And we've had 6 so far this year, but I think you'll agree with me that 18 is not a number that keeps folks employed in your office. So we clearly need assistance from you. As an aside, since I'm giving you bad news, I could give you better news, which is if you actually gave us more lawyers, we'd save the state money. We estimate that if we had 16 and a half more lawyers, we'd save the state a net savings of $1.8 million. So the way in which to save money from the Attorney General's office is actually to give us more lawyers rather than less lawyers. And as many of you know, being lawyers yourselves, it's simply because the cost of the lawyer in our office is far less than the cost of outside counsel. And we'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions.
Which one of the mic shares is this? Representative Powell.
Thank you. Sam, good to see you.
Good to see you, sir.
And I'd like to correct you. I'm not an attorney. I work for a living.
Well, I said some of the attorneys. I didn't say all.
You have lost your speaking privilege.
If I might ask a question, and from what you say is exactly right, and a lot of us that's been on this committee for years understand that. Do you have a feel, or does anyone, Darrell, anybody in the department, do y'all have a feel about across all of the state agencies, which it has become more than common over the years, that they hired their own attorneys, agency attorneys? In a lot of cases, not just one, but maybe even a staff of attorneys. And the reason I ask that question, do you have any feel about the number of department attorneys there are, and maybe even embellish it a little bit? I know you've only been on the job about a month and a half, but what kind of problems that there may be that when they're doing advice in their respective agencies, how much does this come back to haunt the AG's office when y'all have to defend dumb decisions?
Representative, there are actually more lawyers in executive agencies than in our office. The House Budget Office recently put out a report which showed, I believe, 188 executive agency lawyers. The part that's even more troubling is we're losing lawyers to some of the executive agencies who are then hiring them for more than we're paying them. At the request of Representative J. Powell, we did submit a memo a couple weeks ago that went back to the way it used to be, where there was a single lawyer per agency that was the day-to-day person to provide resource assistance, with the balance of the lawyers being in-house with the Attorney General's office. As I'm sure many of you are familiar, in 1995 an Attorney General opinion was written that confirmed that those lawyers in the executive agencies do not have attorney-client privilege. That is a walking time bomb with regard to prospective litigation. It is clear that a change is necessary, but we would need leadership from your committee and the legislature to be able to make the appropriate moves, which may in fact be a further savings. I hesitate because, candidly, we don't know what some of those lawyers are doing. We don't know if they're lawyers but not doing legal work, or what legal work they're doing. We do know that at times problems occur. Before the last execution involving Emmanuel Hammond, we spent 2 days in Fulton County as a result of the agency not responding to an open records request. That was 2 full days of between 2 and 3 of our attorneys defending something that we couldn't defend. So clearly problems do ensue, and efficiencies could be enhanced significantly.
So let me ask you then, given that this is just basically a problem of evolution of government and government agencies, and I certainly understand, depending on what the agency is, that a staff attorney may be there to do right-of-ways or do the ministerial functions. But I think we're in agreement that we need to get a grip on this, and a lot of these staff attorneys could be designated over to the AG's office.
Absolutely.
Or at least under your umbrella, so that they could be shared to do other functions, and under the direction of the AG's office to give some unified opinions that might keep us from getting in deeper.
Yes, sir.
Chairman Willard.
General, I thought I read in the paper a while back that you were going to be publishing on your web page a showing of what we have as far as outside counsel and payments being made. Has that been implemented?
Yes, sir.
And the reason I ask that, someone has proposed legislation. I don't know if it's necessary if you do it. Tell me what you're providing on there as far as information for the public.
Oh, it literally has the name of each lawyer and what they've billed the last quarter. It has full
Hourly
information.
rates?
It does not have that, but I certainly would not be opposed to that addition. Candidly, the Fulton County Daily Report used to send an open records request to our office every quarter, and then they'd receive it, and I frankly thought that was foolish. That information should be readily available. I'd certainly be happy to work with staff to make sure the hourly fee is similarly on that website. That's good business.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Chairman Bearden.
Mr. Chairman, going back to what you were talking about earlier with all these staff attorneys out there, do you have any type of thoughts or proposed legislation that you might be able to work with us on that could address that problem?
Candidly, I don't think it requires legislation. The statutory scheme now specifically says that lawyers that represent the state are in our office. It is a creature of political discourse between prior elected officials that have led to the current system. Some of the agencies even have legal stationery, which I find frankly offensive, but which currently exist. The bigger issue is a decision with regard to the budget. Now keep in mind, if an agency has a couple lawyers and they are 40 hours a week plus doing law for that agency, moving them over to the AG's office would not give me the ability to do more, but at least would give me the ability to monitor what's occurring there, which is a positive in and of itself from a legal perspective. But as we sit here today, I don't know whether there are quote-unquote lawyers and agencies that really aren't doing legal work or not.
Well, it just goes back to the point that sometimes government can grow without needing any help from us, and we just want to make sure that we get this under control.
Oh, I absolutely would support that process, sir.
So just let me know what
Since a lot of these are executive agencies, have you had any conversations with the governor's office about this?
When we brought the memo over to you, and I also believe Chairman Willard, we also gave a copy to the governor's executive council. I can't say that we gave a copy to the speaker. Also, I can't say that we've had a discussion with Mr. Markle or the governor since then, but I'd certainly be happy to arrange a meeting.
Okay. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. AG, the attorneys in the different agencies, do they ever contact you on definition of things, and are anybody on your staff?
Yes. But
Yeah.
Candidly, depending on the agency, the frequency of those contacts vary.
Right. But they do, though, and that
Yes.
way, and I think that even lends more to the fact that they need to be under your umbrella, because if you're constantly answering questions like that, I think that's only if you've got to, because they'll come back to you.
Well, the problem is when you come up to you in the first place after a problem has occurred.
And then you're expected to fix it.
Yes, sir. We do our best.
Representative Powell or Green, depending.
A short note to follow up on that question, because it certainly has piqued the curiosity of the committee and myself. Do you know of any process that these 188, quote, executive agency attorneys, that anyone checks to be sure that they are in fact bar certified, that they are doing their continuing education, and such as that? Somebody that might have been hired several years ago may not, in fact, if they just could take it at their word that they are in a, quote, bar certified or bar licensed. And then who is responsible for their continuing education if they're a, quote, executive attorney?
Our office is not. We monitor our attorneys, but not the attorneys from the other agencies. We also provide CLE in our office, which saves money. We're I believe under state bar rules, half the hours can be handled in-house.
Going back to the tracking sheet,
Yes, sir.
explain to me, there is a reduction that looks like on the tracking sheet that says replace state funds with a projected increase in other funds. Is that what you...
That's the 8 versus the 28% increase. We increased the hourly fee from $100 to $110 an hour. That provides an 8% increase in the total fee, not a 28% increase. So the numbers were just candidly wrong that came from OPB in that area. The only way we could increase our numbers in that area are either increasing the hourly rate to those agencies or hiring more lawyers that would be billing more hours. Both of those other alternatives are contraindicated for budget savings.
But it's still, even if at an increase in an hourly rate, it shows a minus $549,000.
And that's because they are expecting a 28% from that $10 per hour raise rather than what we have seen, which is approximately an 8%. You know, for instance, if we raise the hourly fee $20, that brings in more money to our office, but the agencies that we bill, i.e. DOAS, need to have those dollars in their budget to pay for it.
And that you don't see that.
No.
So except for the increase for the Medicaid fraud unit, which is basically just transferring people over there, your budget is proposed to be cut 1.2?
Yes, sir.
$1.2 million?
And knowing that last time we received attorneys, there was a 2.6% factor of savings. If we're cut 1.2, I think it's fair to assume that that's about a $3 million increase in SAG fees. It's the exact opposite of what's needed.
I think if we took a poll of this committee, it would be overwhelmingly that you're preaching to the choir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
We do understand the
I
problem.
I understand. Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
Any other questions for the Attorney General?
Greatly appreciate your time and your questions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Department of Defense.
Our budget's found in section 19, excuse me. Fairly straightforward as a follow-up to the 11 budget. And the department, our budget's broken into 3 program areas. The first is Department Administration. There are no changes in there other than the program changes and telecommunication expenses, workers' comp, and employee retirement systems. Those are straightforward. Military readiness, the second section, which is a primary part of our budget. There is a decrease of $231,540 in personal services. Those are the 5 positions we talked about in the 11 budget that were added in last year's initial budget, which was bringing back balance to our federal-state partnership and what positions the state should provide versus the feds. We, with the 4% decrease required in July last year, we had to essentially not fill those positions, and then offer them up as part of the cuts. We are still concerned about that. We continue to use uniformed personnel to fill positions that are otherwise required for the state, but hopefully at some point in the future we can make those adjustments. The other issue in military readiness, which is not addressed here, is similar to the 11 budget. We have a shortage in utility cost. The utility budgets were based on prior year funding. We have grown 40% as an agency in number of Army manpower over the last 4 years. It is a great thing for the state. We have brought in several hundred millions of additional federal dollars in payroll alone into Georgia. The cost of that to the state is basically a share of the utilities and maintenance of the new facilities that come online to maintain these. And our projected shortage in 12 at this point is between 280 and 300,000. We will need to address that at some point, hopefully in this budget. Those are all for good things, though. The increases there means that we are continuing to grow. They're not just increases. I would remind you that of what the state puts into the Guard, about 65% of our military readiness budget is purely utilities and maintenance for the armories, where the feds pay the balance of the cost in those armories, plus all the equipment and such, as well as all 100% of the payrolls and operating expenses go into the community. So it's about a 99-to-1 ratio, but it still does cost the state as we grow. The other is a reduction of 56,000 in our third program, Youth Education Services, which is the YCA programs in the state, which y'all are mostly very familiar with. And if you're not, I invite you to pay a visit. Just give us a call. There's a $56,080 cut in the program costs there. That is a 75-25 federal state match for those programs. With the additions in the telecommunications, workers' comp, and employment retirement services, the net is only a 22,000 reduction. Those other cost increases are eligible for match from the state side, so we can certainly work within those numbers. And so the only addition I would ask you to consider is looking at the utilities costs, and if you can, give us some assistance there. Otherwise, we'll be carrying that problem forward another year. And as we discussed at the last meeting, the only options we've had in the past is to essentially steal from our maintenance accounts. And since those were all 100% converted to bonds, we really don't have any internal options at this point.
Two questions. The
Yes, sir.
$230,000 that we put in the 11 amended budget,
Yes, sir.
for utilities,
Yes, sir.
if we put that same amount in the 12, that will be sufficient?
Well, we're looking at about 280 in the 12. There's some additional temporary armories coming online. It's going to be a little more in 12 than it was in 11, but it's certainly the 230 would give us. We'll be back visiting whatever the balance is next year in supplemental, but it's going to be a little more than last year. We have a part of the growth of over 3,000 soldiers on the Army side, which brought tremendous revenue into a lot of communities where there's construction of 4 armories. Those armories begin to come online, and those bring additional utility and maintenance costs with them. So we see that number in utilities is going to climb over the next 3 years as additional facilities come on board. And the state, as you may recall, pays 50% of the cost of utilities and maintenance on armories that are located on state property and owned by the state. On federal property, it's typically 75% federal, and we are moving more and more armories onto federal property as we can to try to keep that cost as low as possible. Where we have communities with growth and soldiers that are near federal installations. So that number really needs to be more like 280 to 300 to actually be accurate.
And the $56,080 is for Youth Challenge?
That's Youth Challenge, but the addition of some of the other categories, including employee retirement, actually help mitigate that, and those are also eligible for matching the federal dollars. So we really don't lose the 56. It's actually a net of about 22 in the Youth Challenge program, so we're able to work with that.
But we're also losing federal matching dollars.
In this case, we're actually not. It appears that we are on the budget, but the fact is we made an adjustment this last year. I mean, we came back, fought for some legislation with some other states, and reduced the state match requirement for the Youth Challenge programs from 40 to 25%. There's some adjustments made, and one of the programs began in July 1 of this year. The other became in September 1 of this year. So there's some internal adjustments there. We have everything matched with federal dollars now, but there was a slight rounding thing there that we really are not going to lose federal dollars apparently with the increases. And if it had been the whole 56,000 cut, we would. But with the mitigating increase of 26,000 in employer and the retirement system and the 7,000 workers' comp, that actually pretty much works out so we can retain the federal dollars.
So is it your position that we worked very hard not to cut Youth Challenge too much last year? Is your position that this is not a real serious cut this year?
No, sir. We will not lose lose students based on this 22,000 net cut. It's the carryover from the change in match rate this year will help us offset that.
Okay. Any questions from the committee?
It may not work out in 13 quite the same way, but right now we're good.
We'll take them 1 year at
Yes,
a time.
yes, sir. I figured that.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Department of Juvenile Justice.
Ready, you got a question? We'll go ahead and let them present first. Go ahead, Amy. Glad you're here.
Good afternoon. The FY 2012 reductions are annualizations of the amended FY 11, which you've already passed in House Bill 77, with the exception of one-time reductions with motor vehicles and contract reductions. I'll just go through what those reductions were again. It includes the closure of 2 RYDCs at $5.4 million. Those are 30 beds. They include 56 positions at each, so a total of 112 positions. Reduction of personal services are 69 positions at $5.3 million, and that's accomplished through maintaining a hiring freeze of an additional 47 positions, the elimination of 11 administrative positions, the elimination of 11 education positions, which we accomplished through a class size change in our YDCs. The elimination of paid overtime being the fourth in that area in the personal services. And then, then additionally, the reduction of residential bed contracts. There's 106 bed closures at $6.5 million. These were all contracts that had ended, and so we were able to realize the savings in the 4 programs: Macon Behavioral Health, Project Adventure, Baker's Ferry, and Augusta A&D. And then finally, $500,000 in operating expenses. So that includes the annualization of those cuts. I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
Representative Green.
You're going to have to cut on Representative Powell's.
Is that 16?
Yeah, mine's back on.
Well, I just turned it back on. Is it working or not?
Yeah. This one's on. Commissioner, which of the RYDCs, the 2 that are you going to close?
At this point, we still haven't made a determination. We are still evaluating our utilization, looking at geography. One of the complications in this is looking at our catchment areas, trying to determine based on population, really trying to make sure we're making a sound decision in those.
I understand from some sources that y'all have made that decision.
We have identified, in the governor's proposal, we had identified a number of facilities. If we had to rank out of those, there are some that we think narrowed more than others. But we have not made a final decision yet. We are still...
What are those rankings right now?
Of the 5 that we named, there was Claxton, Griffin, Gwinnett, and Griffin. Did I get that? And Baxley.
Blakely.
I apologize.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask another question?
Go ahead.
There is a contract for the RYDCs to I think the amount is somewhere around a little over $70,000 to provide computer professional services there. What does the contract do exactly?
Under the RYDC's program area, we do have, within the department, we do have programmers who create programs or help us, and we are a very tech-savvy agency, and so we have a database in which we enter all our information for juveniles that are through the department, that we handle through the department. And so those programs can either help us in making adjustments, create new programs, or new modules. That's part of their function for us.
But that's not through the educational portion of the for the school year, is it?
I would have to see the document you're talking about. I'm not quite sure then.
Okay. We can share that with you.
Okay. I'd be happy to answer one.
Okay. Thank you.
Chairman Willard.
Thank you. Commissioner, you were probably here, I think, when we were going through the questioning of the Corrections Department about contracts. Does your department also have private contracts with service providers or vendors? And what is the policy in your department with review and rebidding of those contracts?
I'll let Jeff answer in more detail, but we do follow DOAS regulations in relationship.
I don't know what those are as far as regulation. I want the specifics of what and how those are handled. Because I think we got too many of them just sort of float over and float over and float over.
Again, very similar to the response you got from corrections. Some of it depends on the type of service you're procuring and the amount of money that you're spending. That's kind of what the DOAS guidelines tell you, that for a small amount of money you may have to do 3 contacts with bidders. You may have to use a statewide contract for certain items. When it gets to a larger contract over a certain amount of money, then you must actually have a formal procurement process, usually a bid. In many cases for services, it's an RFP, a request for proposals, that goes out. For us, our big contracts, which are our privatized facilities, we do RFPs for those. They typically are 1-year contracts to be with an additional year for 5 years. We have done it in the past for 10 years. That kind of keeps a vendor on the hook, what we found in a volatile situation, too long to adjust to our demands and needs and changes over time. So 5 years has worked for us. Most of ours are bid on a 5-year RFP, annually renewable.
I would follow up, Mr. Chairman, just to express a belief that under the current financial, fiscal, economic situation, a lot of these vendors and service providers are open to doing it. When they realize there's a rebidding going on, you're going to find your prices are coming down quite a bit. So you may be losing opportunities if you don't make a review of those and take some action to say, okay, we're going to go through a rebid and re-looking at what we're paying if it's been in place for 4 or 5 years especially.
Again, typically on our larger contracts, what we've seen historically is an increase. We typically don't get a CPI-based increase year to year. Again, as what we've seen in the past is almost every time we rebid, the price goes up. I think on some supplies, materials, smaller contracts, you're absolutely right that we do those more often. It's the big, more costly ones that we spread out. We do also do a number of contracts that are based on and agreed upon. It's based on actuarial rates and cost reports and reviews. We contract with the same vendors that the Department of Human Services does. You all know those as foster care type placements where you pay a per diem as needed. It's not a guaranteed number of beds. We use those as needed. So those are procured a little bit differently, and we have about 270 some kids in those kind of placements, and those are reviewed annually as well.
Okay. One further follow-up, Commissioner, and this goes to the, I think I've expressed to you in the past, a strong belief I have about trying to maintain juveniles in their communities except where there's a felon type situation that has to have special attention. What is being done through your department as we're looking forward with trying to change what we're seeing as short-term detention facilities or other regional facilities for those who are maybe considered delinquent, misdemeanor violations, et cetera, to get them back in the community and stay there?
For For the low-level offenders, we're not talking about those youth, but we hope to pursue something that would be like a good behavior bill for youth who have been in a secure environment and have achieved the benefit of getting their GED, have had good behavior while they're inside, and have demonstrated that under judicial review they might be able to better function outside in the community with some supervision. And so that's some policy that we look to achieve in this session. Down the road, we definitely, as I look at building our strategic plan for the future, we are focused on where we can best serve, very similar to the governor's focus, where we can best serve our population based on their need, and for those who are higher risk, certainly in a more secure environment, but those who are medium to low risk, providing as much opportunity as we can with support in the community.
And do you have specific programs that are being implemented at this time on that basis?
Not additional programs, not at this time.
Chairman Beard.
I gotta ask you a question. I need to know what the negative side of this question would be if we asked the department to shut down other RYDC. What would be the negatives?
The challenge for us would be with our population. Right now, and this is the challenge in naming trying to determine which RYDC will close. Right now, all of our facilities are at 100%. And so the bigger issue is for our long-term facilities and those youth who are waiting to go into a long-term facility. And so the challenge for us would be creating overcrowding. With the proposed closure of 2, we can manage that in the short term. I think I've talked about the concerns about sustainability. Closing another facility, which would be, could presumably be at another 60 beds, is another 60 youth that at this point I don't have space for in our current capacity. So it would be tremendously challenging for us in terms of our capacity issues and overcrowding.
What's the number of people do you have on a regular basis?
In detention.
In detention, I'm sorry.
On any given day in detention, we have about 1287 in detention.
And these cost approximately 200 and what per day?
230.
I know we reduced the time from 60 to 30.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to make sure we're accomplishing the goal we need to at 30, or does something need to be done at does more need to be done at the local level on sending them to these short-term facilities?
Certainly there is an opportunity to be very thoughtful in the community about which kids, as we've used with adult offenders, we're mad at versus those that we're scared. If I had my choice, I know that juvenile court judges make very hard decisions every day about removing a youth from the community, but the biggest challenge for us in managing our capacity is we really need those youth in hard beds that we present a real safety risk. And that's a hard decision, but that's the real challenge there, is that those especially low-level offenders, we need to think of other alternatives for them.
One more follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Those that we have in the facilities, you bring up a perfect point between those we're mad at and those we're scared of, just like in the big boy facilities. How many are these that's in the facilities right now, what you call low-level?
Percentages of 40. If I remember correctly, it's about a quarter. It could be more, but I think it's about a quarter of our percentage in detention that are medium to low, mostly low. So we have a good number that are low-level offenders.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
The RYDCs are your short-term facilities,
Yes, that's correct.
and they are generally youths who either are awaiting dispositional hearings or who have been sentenced to less than 30 days. Is that generally what these facilities are used for?
They are, yes, that includes some of it. Arrest. So at the point of arrest, we would be holding a youth. For some youth, for low-level offenders, it could be up to 72 hours. We do have 440 youth pre-sentencing that are in our detention centers. And then we do have a certain segment of youth who have been sentenced that are waiting to go to our long-term facilities that are in there.
What percentage are somebody who's being held awaiting a bed in a long-term facility?
This morning I was told I have 230 youth who are waiting. About 230 youth are waiting to go to a long-term facility.
And out of how many?
I'm sorry?
Out of how many?
1280.
Okay. So about a sixth of what's in RYDC is just someone who is waiting for a bed at an RDC?
Yes, and that's an all-time high for us.
Typically, how long do they have to wait before that bed is available?
Right now, we do have some youth who are spending the length of their sentence at the short-term facilities. It can average 6 months. It could be longer.
So is it your feeling that even though you say you can manage the closure of 2 more facilities at the RYDC level, are you telling us that maybe we don't have enough RDCs if we can close RYDCs? Is that where the problem is?
Bed space is an issue. The sustainability is definitely something I'm concerned about. And so looking down the road, we have beds that are completed, that are ready. We just don't have operating funds. So during this budget cycle, I think I can manage. It will be challenging, but long-term, looking towards the future and future budget cycles, that would be something that we would be talking to you about.
Okay. Now, let me ask you one final question. I noticed that, and I understand that you've got some of these RDCUs that are being housed in the RYDCs. But I noticed in your budget that you've got approximately $1 million of psychiatric services in the RYDCs. And that strikes me as kind of strange since they are short-term facilities. And you can't do a whole lot of psychiatric services for somebody who's housed there for 30 days or less. And I'm I guess confused because of the fact that it seems like there's a disproportionate amount of your psychiatric funds are being spent in the RYDCs.
It can be a number of things. We do have psychiatrists on staff, but that may include the cost of assessments, so determinations for placement in other locations. I'm not sure exactly what that figure may be that you're looking at, but that would be my best guess.
Will you find out and coordinate with Kendra and get that information to us, please? Chairman Willard.
Thank you. Ms. Howell, one of the area I want to touch on is you are under, I say you being your department, under the obligation that if a juvenile judge sentences, whatever that sentence is, you're obligated to take the child regardless.
That's correct.
Do you believe that if you did a appropriate risk assessment evaluation and had some degree of input before that sentencing was done, that may help lessen the type of low offenders and really delinquents that are being sentenced, as opposed to taking everything that has to be submitted to you by the courts?
The courts where we provide intake, we do use an objective screening tool, and we found that it helps in identifying really objectively what level of risk a youth poses, and helps us to determine who are best suited for detention or otherwise.
But that's all after sentencing.
Actually, in the courts where we use it, those courts, it would be pre-sentencing. But that's not all courts that we do.
Well, I want to ask you this way. It's not done in all courts. What percentage are we looking at that are being done where the sentencing occurs and then a risk assessment or evaluation?
That I'm going to punt to Jeff.
I think I'm following. Where we do intake, and we call those dependent courts, the assessment tool is used. Again, it's not prescriptive, meaning there's no cutoff scores that keep a kid from coming in. It's just a guide or a tool. The judge can override it The judge can decide whatever the judge wants to decide. But we have seen, with its use, a lower percentage of low-risk offenders coming into the beds than in what we call the independent courts, which are mostly the metropolitan area courts that are not required to use the assessment tool, do seem to have a higher percentage of lower-risk youth coming in, we believe.
Why are they not required to use it? I'm confused. What's the reason?
There's no legal requirement for the judges to use it.
Well, is there any legal requirement that be a risk assessment on any child before it's given to your department?
No, there's no reason.
So what you have is judges voluntarily doing that, and some don't do it.
That would be a way to describe it, yes.
Thank you. That's all.
Representative Burns.
Commissioner, I think you said it was $230 a day, the cost. What's the cost on a YDC?
It's about 200. I mean, it's
200 there too. Now, how many YDC beds or facilities do we have?
how many YDCs? We have 6.
6. Are they all private, or are they, what are they run by? Do we own them, run them, or do we have some privates also?
We have one private facility.
Where is it located?
That's our Savannah River Challenge, so it's in South.
Have we determined any difference in the cost in the public facilities and the private facilities on a per day basis?
Well, there is at that facility. Again, that's a different type of facility approach. It used to be a facility exclusively used for the short-term program. When we changed that law over and we closed the beds at Milledgeville last year, the YDC beds, we've shifted that to a regular detention facility. A regular YDC. It's staffed a little differently. It's not secure, and we have to be very selective in the youth that we send there. They don't provide the same level of staffing and treatment that we provide in our YDCs. So it's kind of morphed. We're rebidding that contract now, and we'll see what we get when we come back. But it's not apples and apples comparison. But the way we had it before, it was cheaper.
Well, I guess I'm somewhat familiar with that one, and I thought the costs were considerably less in that one. So that explains that. Why that may be.
Back to the earlier question, I think we'll see a little cost increase which we may have to talk to you about in supplemental budget.
And you do have, you say you have some beds that aren't ready in the YDCs that
Yes.
we're not funded.
We have 4 facilities that would be ready. Is that correct? 4 facilities that would be ready, either by renovation or construction, but for operating expenses.
And the model you use on Savannah River is not applicable now as far as capturing those type costs per day anymore?
It's a different type of model. Right now we're using it as basically like a transition back into the community program, so it's a little bit different than what we would need, which is more of the front end of youth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take a 5-minute break. this button. We are back in session, and we have the Department of Public Safety. Welcome, Colonel.
Thank you.
Primarily what we want you to do, and I think we're in section 38 of the tracking sheet, if you will just go through the highlights of the governor's recommendation and then tell us anything else you need us to think we need to know, and then we'll ask questions.
And compared to most of the agencies that have come through here today, ours is pretty easy, I believe, because most of them are global changes that are reflected on here. And in fact, that's the case in the first 4 sections. If you move down to field office and services, the one thing, and I keep bringing this up, and Kendra caught me last time, I could tell by the look in her face. I said there was an error in the budget from OPB. There was $200,000, but in fact it's $1,161,000 plus $200,000, and I know that at least she's aware of that, and my assumption is that the whole board is by now, but we'd certainly like to get that corrected. The other thing in here that looks bad is...
Is that 3855? Is that what you're talking about? No, 38 what?
It's 3854.
Okay.
And what that is the stimulus monies that we received last year was like $8.8 million, and what happened was they took $8.8 million out of appropriated funding and gave us the stimulus money. So since that's gone away, it has to be put back in.
Okay.
Or it doesn't have to be, but we certainly would appreciate it. And that's the only really 2 items in that section. Motor carrier compliance section, and the last item there is 38.64. And we talked about this twice before too at the Joint Appropriations Committee meeting and during the amended budget. And what it is to bring our overweight citation program up to speed to conform to federal and state guidelines. I think most of you have heard it, but we're down to about 30% compliance now on weighing trucks that come through the state, and we're so short on manpower. We only keep each weight station. We have 19 permanent weight stations, and we have a group of people that have mobile weight stations, but we're only able to keep them open about 8 hours a day now. And we changed 93 of our positions from post-certified officers to weight masters. This is an administrative function. The pay is about a third less than it is from a certified officer, and what happens with regard to the weigh stations and personnel, for every $2 the state invests, you get $3 back. So we would ask that we get the 1.928 million so that we can add 63 positions. And the federal government has been after us, and the DOT has cut off our money that we get from permitting twice because we haven't met their standards and held the money for 6 months, which is, and Representative Burns has been involved in some of those. And that's essentially it, except for the questions.
Talk to us a little bit about cars. There aren't any cars in this year's budget, are there?
There aren't any cars in this year's budget, and I've said it before, but we need about 200 cars a year to maintain a fleet that we rotate every 5 years with 135,000 miles. That's the cars that we actually use on the road. Enforcement cars, we run the other cars till they quit. Administrative cars, somebody like me drives it. It dies before we turn it in.
How much does that equate to 200 cars in dollars?
Get my math man here.
It's going to be a little over $5 million.
But we haven't had that in 4 or 5 years. Used to be we got $4 million a year back in the 90s. But we did some bonds last year, which were about $2 million.
Yes, sir, $2.380 million.
The year before we got a little bit less, but our car situation is pretty dire.
So in other words, you either need $5 million in bonds or $5 million in appropriation or some mix in order to not even catch you up, but to maybe keep you even or just come back to where you should have been.
That's correct.
Okay. Chairman Bearden.
Colonel, just real quick on these 57 civilians on the commercial vehicle compliance. If that's approved, how quickly can they be trained and up and going in these way stations?
They get on the job training. There's no required schools for that. You sit in the facility and you wait the trucks as they come by. Now, it takes some understanding, and Representative Burns is from my home county, and I know what he does for a living, and you have to be pretty confident about the amount of weight on different axles and different types of trucks. But we think we can accomplish that probably in about 5 to 6 months. But when we change this position, what it does, we spend a lot of time with post-certified officers. You're aware they have to get the minimum training every year. They have to go to the pistol range. They get called off for special details. We have a tornado or a hurricane. We have to send 300 or 400 people, and it takes them away. We've looked at it from the perspective that we've had some cadets that were waiting to be post-sworn officers and put them to doing these functions, and they never leave. They don't have any training. They don't have anything else. They sit there, and we get a whole lot more work out of them. And essentially with this, we'll get it for a less amount of money. And this is an administrative function. They don't go to court. They go before an administrative law judge, and it's just like a meter maid or somebody that does code enforcement.
Thank you, sir. Is that all? That's all I got.
The gasoline money that we put in the 11 was basically to hold you to the end of the fiscal year at about $50,000 a month. Is that same amount what you need in order to go through the 12?
I think based on what the price of gas is right now, but as we've all seen, it's gone up dramatically. I think about 25 cents a gallon in the last 2 months. And all the predictions I see is that it's going to continue for a while. I think some of the projections are $4 a gallon by midsummer.
Will $50,000 a month help?
Oh, certainly.
Okay.
Certainly.
Chairman Burns.
Quick one, Colonel. Where do we stand now as far as your ability for your men officers to communicate with each other? How far along are we?
You mean with the new computer-aided dispatch system?
Yes, sir.
We've got it all in place. We're waiting now for some of the records management systems to be completed, but we were required by March to have that done. It's a federal project. We got $13 million to do that. And just as a sideline, I think most of you know, but we were able to eliminate 70 radio operator positions, and we moved our dispatch centers from 45 to 9. And but we're dispatching out of all of them now. It's much more advanced. It provides permanent records, and we are able to track our people. It's on GPS. We know where everybody is all the time. When we had our trooper that was killed, we were able to identify where the vehicle was on the screen.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Oh, wait, just one second. Oh, we're going to get them. I'm going to call them up here. Post.
Good afternoon. We're also coming from section 38, be 3811. Quickly, with my eyes full of sand, or pollen, whichever, I'll do the best I can to read these things. Reflecting adjustment in the telecommunications, workers' comp, increase the funds for the share of the employees' retirement system, reduce funds for contracts with the Sheriff's Association and Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police, reducing operating funds and reduce funds for personal services to reflect savings from 2 vacant positions. So that's where we are. The impact of that on post quickly is loss of 4 part-time employees. Post previously reduced the staff by 20% in 2010 and 11, and this reduction would further reduce our staff from 20% to 25%. The effect of this, gentlemen, would be to increase the time to issue those certifications that are being earned out in the field, and also to complete those investigations of officers. Secondly, the inability to hire a programmer. We've had a programmer on our list for
computer program.
Yes, sir. That we lost. We have now put in our new database, and we really need that programmer for the daily programming responsibility, because without that, then we have to go out into the private sector, and that's going to be costly and put us at the mercy of that private vendor. Thirdly and finally is our over-reliance. We're going to have to over-rely on our fees to fund our annual budget. We'll not have the funds to add curriculum and training needs to address those needs. And with the advent of this updated computer things, we need an additional air conditioning unit for our IT room. It's not a lot of money. It's $5,000 to $7,000. We're getting those costs now, those quotes at this time, but it's going to be in that range. But we won't have the money. Won't have the money to do it. So that's where we stand, and that's why I bought this little collection plate right here from the First Baptist Church in Millersville, Georgia. Love offering. Oh, no,
Did you have a conference with John Ellington just to determine, how's the best way to get the committee's attention?
No, sir.
He's a master at that, and I thought maybe you'd been taking lessons.
No, sir. I'm just from Millersville, Georgia,
right.
And y'all know what that comes with. So.
According to the tracking sheet,
Yes, sir.
your program net is down $163,000.
Yes, sir.
Right. Realistically, and understand that we're at the minus 1.5 billion, but that hopefully next year things will stabilize. We will not be in the cutting mode next year. Realistically, what can you survive on this year?
We'll survive.
Obviously, you're saying that you cannot survive on minus 163 cut. If we restored part of that, realistically,
$100,000 would be real nice.
$100,000 cut instead of $163,000.
$63,000 cut rather than $163,000 cut.
Okay.
What that means is, Mr. Chairman, we've got to make that money right off the bat. We've got to make that money in order to meet our budget. I'm a team player. Lord of mercy, we want to do what's right. But we also want to provide those services that are fundamental to law enforcement in Georgia.
Questions from the committee? Thank you, sir.
Thank you all very much.
Take your collection plate with you. Or you can leave it for the next guy, either way.
I'm sorry. If Mr. Wendell, if it works, yeah, I'm proud of that. Thank y'all.
Governor's Office of Highway Safety. Write that down. Doesn't care about budget. Firefighter Standards and Training Council. And you want it known.
Well, thank you. We are in the 38.9 area. And we increased funds to reflect an adjustment in the employer's share of the employee retirement system. And we reduced funds for personal service by eliminating one vacant administrative assistant position. So we're down 27% since 2008. And we're taking furlough days to put gas in the vehicles and to service our customers. So basically, that's it. We're ready to answer questions.
How's your burn building doing?
Sir, that won't be our burn building. That will be the Fire Academy. Training Center's burn building. Okay. Yes, sir. And it's doing very well, by the way.
Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Representative Green. It's on.
Is it?
Use Representative Powell.
Yep, thank you. It just won't. No, it's still something wrong with it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's on for sure now. You're doing the new manuals throughout for the volunteer fire department. Is that right?
Sir. We're doing the rules. We're updating our administrative rules, and in turn, we will have manuals for them. Yes.
Did you contract this out to do?
No, sir.
What are other states? Are we the only state that's doing this right now?
No, sir. What the stage that we're in right now is we contacted representatives from 34 fire departments across the state, 5 associations, 4 different state associations to come together and help us put together a administrative rules document. So we're getting our peers to come together and tell us how you want your fire department to function in this state.
Can we get a list of those individuals and
Absolutely.
and how many times they've met
Yes.
and things of this nature on
Absolutely.
that? Let me also ask you, what is your travel allowance?
This year we're down to about $7,500. We have 6 vehicles, and we're having to consider parking them. Last year we parked them about April, and this year it looks like it's going to be that again.
What are we traveling really to do that we can't do emails and things of this nature?
Yes, sir.
Because we're talking about volunteer fire departments mainly.
We're talking about people-wise, there's about 12,000 and some change full-time firefighters and about 12,000 and some change volunteers. And then there's some others. We are really close to about 30,000 firefighters in our state with 647 fire departments. Now,
How many fire departments?
647 fire departments in our state. The travel within our agency comes from our 2 divisions. We have an evaluation division where we test individuals for state certification as well as national certification. We have statute approved or statute directed 5 levels of state certification. If individuals are full-time, they're required to hold 1 or more of these certifications. We test these people. Volunteers choose many times to be certified on the state level, and we also certified 23 different levels of national certification as well. Now, on the travel with the evaluation division, We administer approximately 10,000 tests a year, written tests, and about 8,000 or 9,000 skills tests that they put their hands on. And we do this all over the state. So that entails a good bit of travel. In the compliance division, where we're dealing with fire departments to assure and ensure that they meet the minimum requirements, that the department has sufficient people, that they're trained, that they have insurance, that they're organized correctly, and to offer any other assistance we can. We like to visit them. We're on a 2-year rotation now, so basically that's our travel budget. Plus going to meetings, representing, answering questions, things of that nature.
Do we, is there a way that we can work out where we can utilize some of our state facilities for the testing here, even work something with, or at Forsyth or something, for them to come in and, instead of us having to actually go out and administer?
Yes, sir. Actually, in 2008, when we all started seeing, there's going to be some economic challenges here, we started working on a staff with fire departments all over the state that have the facilities to do this. And we're evolving into the situation that we supply them tests. We have trusted test proctors and evaluators there, and they in turn administer the test and forward us the answer sheets, and we grade them and distribute the information out there. So we're definitely evolving into that. We have been talking about working with the technical colleges with the same thing. So it's in the works, and we already have a few regional test sites up and running. And these guys, quite honestly, it was a blessing that we got these working as quickly as we did and as efficiently as we did, because these people want to help their brother firefighters out. Mm-hmm. They're doing this at their expense, and they're allowing surrounding fire departments to come in. They're hosting it. They're testing the candidates. If tests need to be copied, we approve it. They copy it. They pay for it. They pay for the postage coming back to us, and it's working out pretty well right now. So yes, sir, we're moving in that direction.
So you have some of the regional sites open now?
Yes, sir.
Where are those?
We got Dalton, Savannah, Hall County.
None in Cuthbert.
No, they just closed it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The 30 departments that you've that took part in the new training standards, some of those volunteers, or all of them volunteer departments, or what?
We were directed a year and a half ago, a little bit over a year and a half ago, by our council to get a really good cross-section of fire departments throughout the state. We sent invitations out virtually all over the state to career departments, combination departments with career and volunteer, and solely and completely volunteer departments. And we meet, or have been meeting, this committee has been meeting primarily during the week, and we do not have completely and solely volunteer representation that much. But we have a lot of representation where the fire department has combination employees, both full-time and volunteer. So we have a fairly good cross-section. And as well, both the prominent state associations, the Firefighter Association, the Georgia Association of Fire Chiefs, were invited and have been active in our meetings as well. The Inspectors Association, Educators Association, and fire investigators.
How many? You said this a while ago, but I'm sorry I didn't write it down. So how many volunteers do we have? Volunteer firefighters do we have throughout the state? You got a number on that?
We have, and I'm going to be close here, sir. I can't give you the exact number off the top of my head, but we have 12,000 and some change, and we have 12,000 and some change full time. That number moves a little bit up and down.
So you're pretty satisfied with the fact that the volunteers have representation at the table for the new standard training?
Sir, I am satisfied that the combination fire chiefs that have volunteer firefighters and full-time has very good representation. We have had some concerns in the field that we have very little solely and only volunteer fire chief representation.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? There are none. Thank you very much.
In recap, if I didn't say, if I may, Mr. Chairman, we will be, with this current budget, we will be at least 12 furlough days to keep fuel in the cars and to keep doing our business. Keep the doors open in next budget year.
Understand there are no furlough days in the budget. If you elect to take furlough days, that is your choice.
I understand that completely, and that's my decision, not to. Thank you.
Director Keenan. I don't know. Kendra can tell you.
I could sense that coffee kicking in with the committee this afternoon.
I think the blood transfusion that Representative Green got got him fired up today. You better watch out. We are on the GBI budget, and we are in section 29 on the tracking sheets. And if you would talk to us a little bit about the major changes in the governor's budget, and then some other things that you feel like that we may need to know, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Yes, sir. With the governor's recommendation, with one exception, we have no heartburn with living within the governor's recommended budget. But I do want to highlight a couple of things. The one exception relates to the adjustment in the telecommunications expenses. We've actually been, there was actually $1.7 million too much money taken out of the GBI budget from what the actual costs are. That's more, $1.7 million more than we should have been cut. I'd like to highlight on 29 1.5, which is replace state funds with other funds under administration, and what this is moving 2 staff positions that are currently in the finance section. Those are accounting staff positions that are doing federal grant funds, and the CJCC will use their federal grant money to pay for those positions, since they're doing the federal grant money, doing the federal grants anyway. That's their job. One of the things that we offered up in as part of our budget cut was the $800,000, which is the migration ahead of schedule for the Unisys system. And this is a major upgrade and improvement in the mainframe computer system that the GBI operated off of. By modernizing that and going to the IBM system, working with GTA, we'll save $800,000 annually for that, which is very much positive. Under the Criminal Justice Information Services, there is under 29 2.4, it says utilizing GCIC fees to fund upgrades to the sex offender registry. And currently in Georgia, there are about 18,500 registered sex offenders that register at the local level with the sheriff. That information is then forwarded up to the GBI, which maintains a registry of those offenders. That's a public database. The registry was established in 1996. We're operating off of the same technology, the same software. We hope to be able to utilize a grant from CJCC to pay for part of the cost with improving the registry, and then pay for the remainder with the collection of user fees as the budget document calls for. The cost for the registry is $371,000, software and technology, and then $153,000 for the staff it'll take to manage the registry. This is something that has been desperately needed for a number of years. The design of the registry has been done in conjunction with the Georgia sheriffs, who have play a major role in the monitoring of sex offenders. The other item which I'd previously discussed with in a previous in the amended budget process was the moving of the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit from the GBI over to the Attorney General's office. This is just a transfer of funds. It is something that the Attorney General, the state auditor, and myself are in complete agreement that this needs to be done, and the governor had signed an executive order which will allow that to occur. Under Regional Investigative Services, the major change in it and under task forces involves the transferring of funds in the amount of a little over $1 million out of the task force, multi-jurisdictional drug task force program, and moving that money over into the field operations. That's not a budget cut, it's a transfer of funding. Currently, the GBI supervises 11 drug task forces. I think there's 23 in the state, and we supervise 11 of them. We would not do anything immediately. We would look for an opportunity when there's mutual agreement with local law enforcement agencies to us withdraw from a supervision of a task force and assign that supervisor to other duties within the agency. I'm open to any questions.
Are there questions? We can't let you off the hook without any questions.
Oh, darn.
Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vernon, eliminating the funds for the 5 positions due to attrition, how do you stand on agents right now?
We have 232 agents. At our height 5 years ago, we had 309. So we've taken our budget cuts over the years largely upon not filling vacancies of GBI agents.
What is this attrition rate? How is it affecting y'all's performance? How does it transfer to the local law of the sheriff departments and all without this help?
We are constantly prioritizing our work. Incidentally, while the state has been going through budget cuts and we've lost personnel, there are more demands on the GBI now than there ever have been, because local law enforcement agencies are going through their own budget cuts. They've lost staffing, and they're calling on the GBI to provide investigative assistance. We've got agencies that are requesting GBI help we've never asked before. So we are very, very busy, and we are working the worst of the worst cases and very large and complex crimes, because that is all we have resources for.
In the area of the forensic funding, labs and those things that are vital to building cases for prosecution, even though there's been some help there, but where do y'all stand at now?
We're currently, with the funding that the General Assembly provided us last year, we're doing okay with addressing the backlog. We have increased the staffing in Columbus, which was slated for closure. We're repairing Moultrie, and we'll increase the staffing there. The issues that my priorities are this, and they will come and I realize there's not funding now, but when there is, the absolute #1 priority in the GBI has got to be increased salaries for GBI agents and scientists. We are in a constant turnover of scientific personnel and of agents. And until we can stop us being the training ground, we will always have issues of not being able to meet the needs of the criminal justice system. That's first priority. Second priority is in FY 13, we will need $2.7 million to pay for scientists that are on federal grants that are slated to be eliminated.
How much?
$2.7 million. That's that. Without that, then we'll lose these trained scientists because the federal grants go away. After that is new personnel. But until we address the turnover in scientists in the agent ranks, that's going to be a problem. And the cost savings associated with what eliminating this training, constant training mode would pay for the pay raises.
These forensic scientists, could you give us a little bit of, for our benefit, and refresh some of our minds, but do y'all have a lot of applicants for this? What's the pay scale, starting pay scale? I mean, if I remember right from past years, I mean, you just don't step right out and you're a forensic scientist. I mean, you have to have certain educational background, and then after that, it's almost like a journeyman's training.
Yes, sir. We start out a scientist at $35,000. They're required to have a 4-year degree. Some of them are required to have a master's degree, and it has to be in a field such as chemistry. The training for a scientist is 12 to 18 months, depending on the discipline that they go in. We have no problem recruiting people to apply. It's keeping them once they're trained is the killer. And as we're in constant training mode, as I stated. 2 months ago, we lost 6 scientists at one time. These are DNA scientists, they're firearm scientists, people that we've invested all this training in, and they can go to generally go to another government laboratory at the federal level, making substantially more money and working less. The Department of Defense, their main world laboratory is located here in Atlanta, and they recruit our scientists regularly. That is, and we're operating at a staffing level now that when we lose a trained scientist, that impacts on the workload going through the lab. We're one of the largest laboratories in the country. We do nearly 90,000 cases a year, and the men and women work very hard, but they are stressed out.
The loss of your forensic scientist, how does that carry that a step further? I mean, a few years ago we were losing a lot of our veteran officers, investigative officers, to the federal agencies and, quite frankly, unfortunately, to a lot of the local agencies that were paying more than the state. How is that working at present time? Are you still seeing some of this?
Well, what happens is when the scientists leave, they're leaving us after they've completed all their training, and they should be at their highest productivity level. When they leave us, that creates a vacuum. We've got to go through we've got to go through the applicant process, do the background, hire someone, and then start them into training at 12 to 18 months. We have to take a scientist or scientists off the bench who are working cases to train the new scientist. All of that creates the backlog that's of unworked cases that are in the system. In today's world, the crime lab work is extremely critical. There's the juries and judges demand that there be forensic evidence, that there be DNA in all manner of cases before you can successfully prosecute. We spend a great effort on quality control because the absolute worst thing can happen to the GBI crime laboratory is for its credibility to come into question about the accuracy of its test. And we do tremendous amount of in-house quality control. We're nationally certified, nationally accredited, and we work at maintaining that degree of credibility and accuracy in the lab.
Was somebody to my right threatening you?
No, sir. There's a lot of things I'd like to say in behalf of the GBI. they've done a yeoman's task for years, and being the premier investigative unit of the state, it's just a sad commentary that we've had for years. There's been other priorities that have taken away from us keeping up, and this is the concern that this committee has always had, and I'm sure it still is, that any enhancements. And I would ask you one last question. I was going to bite my tongue and try to keep from. Now I decided not to say something else that I wanted to say, and I said that as diplomatically as I could. If you had a wish list, if there could be any enhancements put back, what would it be?
You talk about in this budget here?
Into the 2012 budget, if there was anything that could be put in that would help the GBI do their job, hopefully in preparation of a couple of years down the road when this economy picks back up.
Don't eliminate these 10 agent positions.
So it's feet on the ground.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Very good.
Chairman Willard.
I will just say in closing, I hope it's closing, Mr. Chairman, that I can commend the GBI on a case that I was involved in about 5 years ago. A young lady did forensic accounting work that was able to prove the criminal conduct of some individuals that led to the bank being involved to come forward on a civil matter and pay the claims. But it was because of the great forensic accounting work of this individual in Director Keenan's department. So you do have high quality people there, and sad to see the state that we're in.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Well, this really is in closing question. The staffing of the Columbus and the Moultrie crime labs, will that result in some savings and some outsourcing that you're doing now?
Yes, we're doing very little outsourcing now. We're only doing outsourcing in a few specialized areas.
Okay.
We've expended all the money we had for outsourcing, and hopefully don't have to go down that road again. That's more expensive than we can do it in-house. But this new staff that's being trained, I mean, when they're fully trained, they'll certainly address the cost per case in those areas.
All right, so there's no outsourcing in this budget?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Director.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And if there's no other business, we are adjourned.